Hi everyone. Um, we are continuing now with our non-Western art, part three. So if you haven't seen part one and two, please go back and make sure you cover those first. The last thing that we looked at was activity 3.1, which you needed to do on page 106 in your textbook. And like I said, in the description is the link where you can find the answers, and I've linked it in this video as well. Okay, so we are now moving on to the art of Japan. So the Japanese were very famous for, um, so if you remember, actually, we did start with the art of Japan when we looked at the Buddha Amida. That was actually also Japanese. Okay, so moving forward again, we're looking now at Japanese printmaking. Okay, so printmaking was a very specialized technique that the Japanese actually perfected, or they um, actually patented the technique. They did woodcut prints. Um, so it was perfected by Japanese artists. In the 17th century, there was a development of art forms for ordinary people in drama and art. And this new style with printing is called ukiyo-e, which actually means pictures of the floating world. We have got woodblock printing. There are nice videos in the playlist about how people actually woodblock print. And if we also look on YouTube, there are other videos of specifically how the Japanese did their woodblock prints. It was introduced to reproduce inexpensive religious images in black and white. So to spread the word and to try and make it cost effective to get these religious images out. By the 18th century, complicated woodblock prints were made by an artist who designed the image in ink, a specialist woodcutter who transferred it to wood, and a printer who added inks and printed the image. So three different people to make one print. One person designing, one person cutting the wood, and one person printing and lining up the prints. So this famous image, Hokusai's The Great Wave, was done in that technique. It was done with printing and woodblock. This picture is dominated by an enormous wave that could be seen as a tsunami or a tsunami happening, but there are certain signs that could indicate differently in the picture. We'll have a look. And one of those signs is if we look at the boats, they do not seem threatened. They are not toppled over. They are simply floating amongst the waves. In the background, we've got Mount Fuji, which is an image that Hokusai liked to use. And he's actually done 36 prints or 36 different images of that Mount Fuji. And we can see it again here in the distance. The composition is divided into flat shapes of color for printing. So each color would have to be done on a different block, and that is why the colors would have ended up so flat. Inside the wave, we've got two colors of dark blue. So you've got that very deep navy blue, and then you've got that slightly lighter one where the lines are put in as a shading technique. At the top of the wave, we've got beige, white, and light blue. Each color needs to be a separate block, like I explained, and then it needs to synchronize with other blocks. So it needs to line up perfectly in order for you to get that image. So the shading needs to fall in the right places. The boats and the sky show similar shades of beige and cream, and that creates unity of the image. So the Japanese, in grade 11, you're going to start looking at Impressionists and Post-Impressionists. And when we look at that, you can see how they were influenced by the Japanese art. If we look at this picture on the right, it is by Van Gogh. And we can see that in the background, he's actually included very Japanese style images. So he's actually put those images into the background. So they began to appear in Europe when they started with trading and importing of goods. A lot of the prints would come with the imports, and that is where the Europeans were exposed to this different technique. And what they took from it was the flat shapes of color with descriptive and decorative lines, so things not being completely naturalistic and being more expressive. It also showed a selective view, not the whole environment, so a snapshot of a scene rather than showing an entire picture. Impressionists and post-impressionists were influenced by the lack of perspective, so very shallow images, and shadow, the flat areas of strong color and asymmetrical compositions. So there's Van Gogh's picture, like I have explained it to you. Okay, now you're going to do activity 3.2 on page 108 in your textbook. Toulouse-Lautrec was commissioned to make the poster Divan Japonaise to attract customers to a newly opened nightclub in Paris in 1893. The nightclub was decorated with fashionable Japanese motifs and lanterns. Discuss how Japanese prints influenced Toulouse-Lautrec's Divan Japonaise by considering the following: the subject matter, so you're going to look at what is in the picture compared to a Japanese print, what are they actually showing, the use of line, shape, and color. So look at, like we said, simplified colors, look at decorative lines, expressionists, colors and shapes. So we're looking at how they use those things. Then composition. So how do they actually frame their pictures? Look at the depth of those images. And then lastly, style. So style overall. How do they look similar? And then straight into the next activity, activity 3.3 on page 109. You are going to look at three different temples, one from India, one from Japan, and one from China. And you are going to look at the differences. Write your comments in your visual studies book. So look at the similarities, look at the differences. What I did, which was quite nice, is you make a 3-column table and then you look at what is the same, what is different in a 3-column table. So look at things like the materials that were used, the shape of the building, the landscape that surround those buildings, maybe even what religion those buildings were designed for. And you can write that all into your visual culture studies book or your theory book. Right, so now we're going into the Americas and we're looking at Native American art. So art made by our Native Americans, or as some people would refer to them as the Indians. So Native American is a term used by the American government to refer to the indigenous people of America, previously referred to as Indians. So the Native Americans don't actually like the term Indians, so that is why they are now termed as the Native Americans. The young Native Americans also call themselves the first natives. Humans migrated from Asia to Alaska, and that is how they would have inhabited America. Artifacts like the Adena pipe, which is the image to the right here, from 1000 to 300, it should be BC, and it was carved from stone with an enlarged head and short limbs in a frontal pose. So it's very rigid almost pose that he is standing in. It would have been sculpted from stone. This would have been a pipe used probably for smoking tobacco, and it would have been used during special ceremonies. Shamans drew evil spirits from the sick body, so this would also be used in those shaman ceremonies. During European expeditions since the 1600s, anthropologists, remember anthropologists are the ones that study the culture. They don't do the digging, they look at the records and they formulate what that culture actually did. Examples of artifacts, as there are no large stone structures. So I think the Native Americans were quite nomadic people. So nothing was really built permanently in stone structures. The products were made from wood, grass, or clay, and therefore they would not have survived. So one of the things that is quite um, famous from the Native Americans are totem poles. So totem poles are poles that were carved from wood, and they represent legends, clans, cultures, cultural beliefs, or special events. So they would have had different totem poles representing different things. So some totem poles are part of mortuary structure with a grave box in a recessed space. So some of them would have acted like tombstones. Some of them were actually for graves. Totems can represent shamanistic powers and social messages. Totems are reminders of deaths, murders, quarrels, and other community issues. So you can see they were used for very, very many things, but they were never ever objects of worship. So they weren't actually part of the religion. They weren't worshipped or prayed to. And that is what the early settlers thought, and they destroyed a lot of totem poles. So there are certain types we're going to look at here called a shame pole. So a shame pole was erected to shame an individual or group who had not paid its debts. So on the right here, you can see that's quite a modern looking one, and that is called the Seward pole in Alaska, and it was made to shame the U.S. Secretary for not paying his debt to the Tlingit people. So they erected this to show everybody that the US Secretary actually owed them money or owed them debt. Totem poles are erected traditionally, still to this day, with scaffolds. So they build like a wooden scaffold around, and then they get the strong men from the tribe to push it up. And everyone dances with the tools that they use to make the totem as part of the ceremony of erecting the pole. Totem poles weather, and it is rare that they last 100 years. So 100 years would be a short span for an artifact, but it is rare that the totem poles would actually last that long because of the materials that they were made out of. So looking at a specific totem pole, this one is called the killer whale thunderbird, and it is a totem pole that consists of 4 different figures. At the bottom, we've got a figure called a cestal, which is a 2-headed serpent that guards the sky people. So basically, they're gods. If you look here, you've got the one head facing that side. The 2 red little bits sticking up are the tongues. So you can see there's the one and there's the other. The second figure in the middle there is a killer whale to represent the clan ancestors associated with strength, dignity, prosperity, and longevity. So we've got the killer whale's head at the bottom here, and we've got the 2 side fins sticking up at the sides there. In the middle, we've got a raven, which is associated with Hamatsa, the winter ceremony. And at the top, we've got the thunderbird, which is a giant supernatural being that causes thunder and lightning. All of this was carved from yellow cedar, which majority of the totem poles are carved from. It's 1 meter high and half a meter wide, so it's actually not quite as big as a lot of totem poles. After it was carved, it was painted. And then in our next video, part 4, we're going to move into the Mayans and look at what the Mayans and the Aztecs have to offer us.